And as you go through the formatting checklist worksheet provided by the Writing Center, you will notice that one of the things that you would need to check off is the use of active verbs. Asking yourself the question, are my verbs constructed in active rather than a passive voice? At the same time, are my verbs powerful and descriptive? Do all my subjects agree with my verbs? So you want, say, I am instead of I are. Have I chosen appropriate verb tenses among different sections? This is something that I encounter a lot as I read papers is there's a variation in the use of verb tenses. And so in one paragraph, a lot of present tense. In another paragraph, there's future tense. And sometimes in paragraphs, present, future, and past tense all just work or are operating at the same time. It's a little bit confusing. So you want to maintain consistency in the verb tenses that you use. If you decide I'm going to write in past tense, and make sure you keep on using past tense. An example of an active verb would be, say, I bought the gum, whereas in the passive verb, it would be the gum was being bought by me. And so an easy rule to remember when you're trying to construct sentences in an active verb sense is, number one, brevity. I find when I'm going through papers and I just have this mindset, I'm going to be brief. I'm going to use this principle called brevity, and I'm going to reformulate and reconstruct my sentences to use as few words as possible. And almost instinctually, there's a sense in which the active verb sense comes out. But if we want more concrete guidance, then we want to make sure to emphasize the subject of the sentence first. Identify the main character of the sentence, the main subject, and make sure to identify them first in the sentence. So for example, in the sentence, I bought the gum, who is the main character? Is it the gum or is it I? And so once you identify that it's I, you want to bring the I up to the very front. And in terms of sentence structure, you want to sort of underscore the subject, I, the verb, bought, and then the predicate, the gum. Subject, verb, predicate, SVP. And when you do that, you'll find more often than not that your sentences naturally follow an active verb sense. So here are some examples. The passive sense would be the detective was murdered by the butler. But if we want to follow the idea of brevity, we want to identify the subject of this sentence. Who is the subject? Is it the detective or is it the butler? Who is the main character? It's the butler. And so we want to move up the butler to the very front, and following the subject, verb, predicate formula, the subject would be the butler, the verb would be murder, and the predicate would be the detective. So the butler murdered the detective. Same thing with the second sentence. John is chosen by Priscilla. We want to identify the subject, which would be Priscilla. And then the verb, which is chooses, and then John would be the predicate. So the subject, Priscilla, verb, chooses, predicate, John. And you'll find that when you compose sentences in an active sense, your sentences will flow, they'll be crisp, they'll have this sort of action and force and momentum to them that makes reading the essay really quite pleasurable. One more word of advice: be careful with pronouns. He, him, she, her, especially when multiple people are being discussed. For example, Calvin and Luther were leading figures in the Reformation. He had a profound influence in Germany. Now this he, who's he? Are you talking about Calvin or are you talking about Luther? It's a little bit confusing, right? So make sure to be clear. And this idea of clarity is really important as you're writing papers. Not only as it relates to the use of pronouns, but say dangling modifiers or incorrect use of modifiers, and the notion of dangling modifiers is also explained in the various worksheets that I provide as well. So you want every sentence to be clear.